This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this video, we'll show you how to pattern and sew up your very own boat helm cover. We will be using Sunbrella Marine Grade fabric from Sailrite to make the cover, and snaps will be used to secure it in place. This helm cover is rather small, but the principles and concepts for larger covers are obviously covered in this video. Let's get started. To prep for patterning, we will use 3M filament strapping tape and place this on the helm panel where we want the edge of the cover to end, all the way around. Since most helm stations include some shape and turns, making a single panel of fabric to cover an object that includes a lot of different shapes usually does not look as good as a cover made to fit or follow the shapely curves and turns. Because of that fact, Brian has decided that our helm cover will be made from 3 separate sections, so Brian will place a run of 3M strapping tape where each separate panel will eventually be seamed together. You will notice that snap studs are already installed in the fiberglass. The tape is being applied directly over those snaps. When it comes time to cut the pattern, we will have to remember to move the pattern edge out at least a ½ inch to accommodate for the snaps. The 3M filament strapping tape is used to easily remove the double-sided seam stick that will be installed next. This seam stick for canvas, part number 129, should be placed directly over each run of strapping tape. If the seam stick were placed directly on the fiberglass or any other metal part, it would prove to be very difficult to remove later on. That is typically not the case for the 3M strapping tape. It will easily be removed. Along this edge and around the wheel, more strapping tape will be applied to help aid in patterning around those areas. Brian removes the seam stick's transfer paper, revealing the glue. Next up, he will be using pattern material to create a form-fitting cover. We will use pattern material called Durascrim and begin basting it to the double-sided tape. The size of the material is too large, but Brian will cut it down to size soon. It is basted in place, but may need more adjustment. It is much easier to make fine-tuned adjustments when it's cut down to size. That's what Brian will do next.
Get behind it.
This panel will extend down the side of the helm instrument panel here. To accomplish this transition, a dart or pleat will need to be sewn into the cover to take out the excess fabric at this turn. As Brian continues to baste the pattern material down this leg, he decides to move the seam stick or double-sided tape so that the pattern material can be stuck to the side rather than the adjacent surface. This turn naturally creates a dart or tuck of fabric at the top. We will mark the pattern material at that position to eventually create a dart in the actual cover fabric later on. This is best done on the Durascrim with a Sharpie marker along the folded edge on this side and the opposite. This typically forms a triangular wedge shape. Once happy with the way the pattern material lays, it's time to mark the material. We will mark the approximate center location. We will also label the panel for easy identification. Then lines will be struck down where we want the seams to be placed. These seam lines are typically placed along the edges of any curved or transitional side. To prep for the next panel, seam stick will be placed over or very close to the seam line we just struck down on the first panel. If placing the seam stick on the marker line, it may remove some of the ink when removed, but usually not too badly that it cannot be retraced later on. Using another cut section of Durascrim, which is slightly larger than the area we are patterning, we will stick this down until we are happy with its look. Because the steering wheel is in the way, we will make a slit from the bottom to allow the pattern material to lay flat around it. Continue to baste the pattern material in place. If you don't like how it looks, you can unbaste a section and rebaste it easily. Trim away any extra, making it easier to make fine-tune adjustments if required. Under the steering wheel, we will leave a U-shaped cutout. Next, strike lines again with the marker on this new panel directly on top of the lines that were struck down on the first pattern panel. Along this bottom edge, the snaps are much lower down than what Brian is marking on the pattern material. He will take a measurement from that mark to the snaps and add some extra fabric along that edge when he cuts the actual fabric to size to accommodate for that. Placing a few tick marks or match-up marks along the seam line on both the first pattern and this second pattern are very helpful when it comes time to sew the two panels together. These match-up marks will ensure that the panels will be sewn correctly across from each other later on. Don't forget to trace an upside-down U-shaped line around the steering wheel. Then move on and pattern any other areas that are required in the same manner. Our Helm cover requires a third pattern panel, and it will be done just as the others were, so we will show this rather quickly. While Brian is patterning for this last panel, let's discuss the types of fabric that we recommend for these types of covers. A breathable fabric is very important for an instrument panel. If using a waterproof fabric, typically a vinyl fabric, breathability would be almost eliminated. Breathable fabric prevents condensation from building up under the cover. This condensation can cause serious issues to not only the fabric, but also the instrument panel itself. So consider using Sunbrella fabric or Surelast from Sailrite for your Helm cover. If you have questions, give us a call or shoot us an email to Sailrite. We're glad to help. And notice that Brian is marking the location of each snap stud with a circle. This means the line he struck down for the edge will need to be moved out about a ½ inch out to accommodate the snaps. That's why he's marked around the shape of the compass base on the pattern material. At this corner, he will trace a small line indicating that more fabric will be required there. After match-up marks are placed on this pattern and the middle pattern, it's time to remove the patterns and cut it out to the final size. That's coming up next. This small end of the pattern was not quite large enough. It was cut short. So a cut section of Durascrim will be added at that location and taped on. This is the bottom edge. The mark indicating the bottom edge was too high and has to be moved down to accommodate the snaps that were a few inches away from that mark. So Brian needs to measure down and mark a new bottom edge for this front panel. A line is not present on the very edge of this pattern because the fabric continues down and is tucked between two sections of fiberglass structure. So here Brian is determining what type of line would look best, and then he will strike it on the pattern material. This dotted line represents the bottom edge of the instrument panel. The snaps are a few inches under that edge. So he will measure and strike a line, a solid line, which will be the cut line that is perpendicular to the dotted line. This is done on the starboard side as well, which is actually slightly longer than the port side of our steering wheel cover. A seam allowance of a ½ inch will and should be added to any seam that will need to be sewn, so Brian is marking on the pattern material to remind him of that fact. Along the extreme starboard edge of the cover, the seaming stops. This is where the middle panel that is joined to this one stops, so he will not add the ½ inch seam allowance along that edge. When the middle panel is joined to the front panel, notice the bottom edges do not line up well, so Brian will square that up with a straight edge. Don't forget to add the ½ inch seam allowance along any edge that joins up with another panel. Along the front edge of the bow pattern, we need to add at least a ½ inch. I would add an inch for the snaps. Remember, we patterned our line almost directly over the snap center when we patterned. Brian did not add the ½ inch along the starboard side of this front panel. Why? Because no snaps are present in our Helm cover along that edge. Upon reaching the first snap, the marked circle, he will gently transition to the ½ inch or more line that he struck onto the fabric. At the compass base, we have a concave dip that will be cut away. Along this outer edge, a 1 inch binding or 3/4 inch binding edge will be added to the cover when all the panels are stitched together. That will be coming up later on. All patterns will be cut out on the line we struck, or if a seam allowance is required, as shown here, a ½ inch away from the struck down lines, they will be cut out. This is the front panel along the starboard edge. No seam allowance is required here, but when we transition to where the middle panel starts, we will add the ½ inch seam allowance there. Using our Sunbrella Marine Grade fabric from Sailrite, we will trace around each pattern with a soapstone pencil. A soapstone pencil allows the marks to easily come off with plain water. Don't forget to mark each matchup mark on the fabric. Those will be used to help line up the adjacent panels when sewing. We also need to mark the location of the dart on the fabric. Here Brian is marking that, and then he'll strike lines down to the point of the triangle. Then we will cut the Sunbrella Marine Grade fabric out with the Sailrite edge hot knife. This hot knife seals the edge of the fabric to keep it from unraveling. This professional hot knife heats up in a few seconds and cools down in a minute or two. We are cutting on top of a metal ruler to prevent damage to the table surface, but cutting on glass is even better. In preparation for sewing, any darts that are located on the cover, they should be marked on the inside or wrong side of the fabric also. Then we will use seam stick for canvas, part number 129, to baste the panels together prior to sewing. This makes it much easier to hold them in the proper place while sewing. Outside surfaces should face each other, and then they should be basted together, being sure that the matchup marks are on top of each other or as close as possible to each other. You may be asking about the dart. Why was it not sewn first, then the panels basted together? Well, it could have been, since it was contained in only one panel. But it can also be sewn after all the panels are seamed together, and that's what we will do. Once these two panels are basted together, inside surfaces are facing out, we will sew along the edge about a ½ inch away from the edge. We will use the Deluxe Magnetic Guide to help guide our work, much like a fence on a table saw. We will also sew this with a straight stitch that is about 6 millimeters long. Be sure to do some reversing at the beginning and end of your stitch to lock the stitch in place. Notice here, at this curved edge, Brian is moving slowly and wrinkling the fabric slightly. As long as the fabric being sewn is not terribly wrinkled, it is acceptable. If they were larger, he would try to distribute the wrinkles, making more rather than less, to keep them as small as possible. These small wrinkles are appearing because this curve is incorporating a lot of shape in the cover. Now that this is sewn or seamed together, let's concentrate on the dart. We still have to sew a top stitch on the seam that we just made, but we will do that later on. We like to use pins to line up the edges of the dart. These pins ensure that the dart will be sewn with the line directly across from each other, like they were when patterning was done. Now simply sew directly on top of the line. Do some reversing at the beginning and the end. All that is left for the first seam is a top stitch. This type of seam is called a semi-flat felled seam. This top stitch should be about an 1/8 inch away from the first stitch, and it should catch the ½ inch tail of fabric on the inside of the cover. We are sewing with the outside surface facing up now. When sewing the stitch, be sure to pull the fabric apart, as shown in the video, thus keeping the fabric folded along the first stitch that was made. It is also important to check under the assembly that the half-inch tail is folded over correctly so as to be stitched into by this top stitch. When that's done, it's time to move on to the next panel. We will repeat the same process for that panel. However, before we baste and sew down the forward panel, let's make a reinforcing strip that will go on the underside of the forward panel to help reinforce our snap fasteners, which will be installed along that edge. Next, we will apply a reinforcing strip to the back side of the cover to provide extra strength for the fastener installation. We are using Sharpie vinyl fabric, which is a tough material that's great for fastener reinforcing applications. Since our cover is shapely and has a lot of curves, we are tracing around the sides of the cover onto the material. We are using a yellow grease pencil for this since the soapstone will not mark this vinyl well. This jig was made from a wooden yardstick. It works well for marking specific distances from the edge of the fabric. We are making a facing strip or reinforcing strip that is 2 inches wide. Sailrite has a brand new ruler called the Sailrite Canvas Patterning Ruler that works wonders for creating reinforcing strips or facing strips like this. It is not shown here because it is still being manufactured. However, we have a prototype that we'd like to show off for the first time in this video. Introducing the Sailrite Canvas Patterning Ruler. On the back side of this clear acrylic ruler is a metal plate that is used as a guide which slides along the cut edge of material, giving you quick and accurate marks. Here we're going to strike a line 2 inches from the edge of this vinyl fabric with the yellow grease pencil. And notice all we need to do is keep the metal faceplate on the rear up against the edge of the fabric, and we can quickly mark the fabric to size even if the edge includes a curve or two. Then, if required, a hemline can be struck down on the fabric by simply placing the marking pencil in one of the adjacent holes. Each hole is spaced at 1/4 inch intervals. You can also use the Sailrite Canvas Patterning Ruler to mark circles. Here we placed an awl in the compass marking hole, indicating the center of the circle. An almost perfect circle to the desired diameter is effortlessly achieved. If a seam or a hemline is desired for that same circle, just move the marking pencil to the correct hole position and strike it down. Order the Sailrite Canvas Patterning Ruler from Sailrite today. Back to our project. Here we are using scissors to cut the Sharpie fabric to size. Then we will apply seam stick to the back side of this vinyl and adhere it to the canvas project. The seam stick is being applied to both long sides of the reinforcing strip. We did not attach our front panel yet to the others, but that could have been done prior to installing the reinforcing strip. Be sure to baste it to the appropriate side of the cover, the inside. When it is secured, we can sew the inside edge with a straight stitch. The outside edge will be secured down when finally we install binding around the edge, so do not sew it yet. Now, if not done already, attach the front panel to the others using the same technique as done when securing the others, using a semi-flat filled seam. Be sure to use the match-up marks. We will not show all of this. Oh, before we move on, we want you to know it's normal when matching up panels with a lot of shape for the extreme ends to not match up, so don't worry about that. After sewing that panel, which was not shown in the video, those ends are simply trimmed off to match or transition smoothly to the opposite panel. We still have a few more sides that need a reinforcing strip to help strengthen our snap installation. Basically, any side that includes snaps or fasteners, we want a strip like this installed on the underside. Once that is completed, we are ready to sew on our binding along the outside perimeter all the way around the cover. That's coming up next. We will use the Sailrite 1-inch swing-away straight-angle binder to accomplish this task. I highly recommend this binder attachment for the job at hand. We are using 1-inch Sunbrella bias binding from Sailrite. These binders will make it possible for you to concentrate on one thing, feeding the fabric up inside the opening of the binder. The binder will automatically fold this prefabricated binding in half and keep the stitch at the correct location, so that leaves you with the simple task of feeding the assembly only. And notice that when we reach a 90-degree corner, the binding is cut and we will sew up the opposite leg. The binding does not usually take a 90-degree turn well. It will, however, take a gradual outside curve very well. When beginning and ending a stitch, do some reversing to lock the stitch in place. You'll notice that we're using a full roll of binding, 300 feet when full. This is how we recommend feeding the binding off the roll. If using shorter links or ordering shorter links, you will have to check the binding occasionally to be sure it does not kink up as it is being fed into the binder opening. This inside curve is not typically something this binder likes to sew, since the binder is often in the way of the turn. However, this one is so gradual that it will be accomplished easily. If you have an inside curve that is deeper, you may want to swing the binder back and sew that portion of binding on by hand. Then when done, swing the binder back into position and continue to sew using it again. Here you can see a sharp turn and the dart that was created earlier. Notice how Brian feeds the assembly into the binder to complete that edge. The cover is now back on the boat, and it's time to determine the fit and the position of each snap. To fit the cover and position the snaps, we will use the Quick Fit Kit. This kit contains snap sockets that have a pin permanently installed at the center location. We will use those to determine the best location for the snap along the cover's edge. The black holding caps are used to keep the pin in the fabric. What's nice about the Quick Fit parts is the fact that they can be used over and over again on multiple projects. You can get them at www.sailrite.com. It is not uncommon for a cover to possibly need some adjusting for a better fit. Here we determined that a dart at this location will tighten up the cover and make it fit better. So we will use the soapstone pencil and mark it, just as we did earlier, and sew in a dart at this location. We will not show this whole process, since we showed it earlier on in this video. The dart is completed, so back to the boat, and we will push the Quick Fit pins back through the holes that we made in the canvas earlier. The Quick Fit kit comes with a tool to remove the snap sockets from the snap studs installed on the boat, but we are using a different tool called the Top Snapper tool, which works in the same manner for removing the sockets. We will install the snaps using the Press and Snap tool. A button snap and socket snap are pressed into the dies of the tool. Then the snap is positioned over the hole that was left after the Quick Fit pin socket is removed. The lever of the Press and Snap tool is depressed to punch the hole in the fabric and set the snap, all in the same operation. The firmness of the lever will typically indicate if the snap is installed correctly, so it does not spin easily by hand when done. If more or less pressure is required, it is simply done via the thumb screw at the end of the tool. Once set for the fabric thickness, it does not need more adjustment. Our cover includes a few snaps along the bottom edge. We will use the Quick Fit kit to position those and the press and snap to install them. Our Helm cover is complete. Coming up next is a materials list and tools list that we use to make the Helm cover. If you have questions, be sure to give us a call. We're glad to help. If you'd like to see how we made the boat wheel cover, click on this video to be directed to it. For more free videos like this, be sure to check out the Sailrite website or subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your loyal support. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.